If you have your Bibles, open up to the book of Exodus. We've been going through this series, Exodus. We know that the Jewish nation, actually, when this book was given to them, they actually named it the Book of Names. We Christianized it and we called it the Exodus because it deals with God's delivering power, that God delivers His people and is part of the great plan that God has and will fulfill for each one of us. It's about our story. And last week we ended at chapter 24, and we kind of looked at this idea of relationship, and that God is a God of relationship, and that His word to us is a relational word, that He wants to impart some relationship principles for our lives. And why? Because He knows that we're fallen creatures and we all need a guide. We need a source to run to. And how many of you have ever been at a place where you needed a guide? Anybody ever been traveling anywhere and you bought one of those pamphlets? Anybody ever buy one of the map pamphlets to a guide? That we have them in St. Augustine. You know, they lay out the streets and they tell you where the things are, and you can't read them half the time because you don't know where you're at anyway. And so many times we try to substitute a real guide for a way of trying to take an easy way. So, you know, we might have enough knowledge, we might have enough stamina to make it through an entire day looking for something. You might have all the things that you would need in order to accomplish a particular project, but unless you have a guide, you're just kind of really spinning your wheels, unless you have somebody who's been there. I remember our honeymoon, Joanna and I, we wanted to go snorkeling, and if I would have paid for that, and I had shown up with my wife, and we had shown up, and the guy would have come and he would have said, here's your snorkel gear, here's the boat, here's a bunch of people. Now, I can't make this trip. Y'all just go out and have fun. I don't think I would have gone on that trip. Now, I know we can go snorkeling, but I paid for a snorkeling experience for a guy to take me to where the best snorkeling was going to happen. And if I had not had that guide, that person, why was I going to spend my money on that? Anybody ever been there? You want somebody who knows where they're going. You want that ability to know where you're going. Why? Because you don't want to spin your wheels trying to figure things out when there are more efficient ways to live this life, to be able to do things. And this is kind of the story of Exodus. This really is kind of, God has placed Moses here as a guide for the nation of Israel, that they can run to him and that he can, as hearing God's voice, and we actually talked about that last week, that the people knew what God did, but Moses experienced God. Moses knew God. He already knew what God was thinking. He was in the presence of God. And because he was there, while the people could see what God was doing, Moses had that relational intimacy with God, that he knew what God was thinking. How deep is my relationship with the Lord? And how much do I allow him to guide me in this life? And how much input do I allow from him to take my steps, to guide my steps? And do I look at other things to be my guide? Many times we allow golden calves into our lives, and we allow them with good intentions. And what we're about to see in chapter 32 and verse 33 is that the nation of Israel had God with them. They saw him in a cloud of fire by day and a pillar of fire by night. They saw a visible and tangible presence of God while they were being led through the wilderness. And then they get to the Mount Sinai. They come to this valley where the mountains coming up off the Sinai Peninsula, and God's presence descends upon the mountain. You remember this? We ended this last week with this idea of God's presence hovering over Mount Sinai, and Moses walks up and he calls the elders to come up with him, and they actually saw God. You see, many times we think about these verses and we read one or two verses growing up. I remember growing up in Sunday school, and they always told me, they always referred to the one verse where Moses, he had to turn his face away from God because God's presence would have killed him. But as I look and I see that God's presence was so real to Moses and the people that they actually saw his presence in a real tangible way as well. They described it as like sapphires under his feet, that his glory was just so transcendent. It was beyond anything that they could ever explain. And yet down in the valley, people are still there grumbling and complaining. Even when God was right there with them. Why? Because they didn't allow God to really come in and do things for them and with them and in them. They were reactionary. If God sent a thunder, then they would react. If God sent fire, they would react. They didn't know him. The thing about the nation of Israel, you remember the book of Samuel talks about 1 Samuel, that the nation of Israel wants a king. Why? Because everybody else has a king. And what they said about this was that they wanted a king because they wanted somebody who can lead them to victory in battle. And this is what I'm thinking. God led you to victory in battle. But they wanted somebody that they could relate to that was more than just faith being involved. It was more of the question of, what do I see? What do I understand? What can I perceive? I think this is so close and so real to where we live today, because we are a science-driven society. It's all about what I can understand, and if I can't test it and prove it, then it doesn't exist, and it can't happen. But the reality is that God is above science, and God is above our human understanding and our human intellect. That's not to say that science is bad, but science should never become your religion. So then how did they get to themselves to this place? Let's start out where we ended off. So God uses his people. There's this relational aspect that he brings into this. And what he wants to do then is to engage them in their talents and in their giftings. And so God wants to use us many times in our talents and our giftings, and he wants to prove us. Once again, that idea of testing us in fire. He wants to prove us through the giftings that he gives us. So in Exodus chapter 31, verses 1 through 6, the Lord said to Moses, "See, I have called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur of the tribe of Judah, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with ability and intelligence, with knowledge and all craftsmanship, to devise artistic designs, to work in gold, silver, and bronze, in cutting stones for setting, in carving wood, to work in every craft. And behold, I have appointed with him Oholiab, the son of Ahisamach, I won't say that again, of the tribe of Dan, and I have given all able men ability." He has given who? All able persons, all able men, the ability that they may make all that I have commanded you. Why? God had given them commands about certain things in their tabernacle. He gives them designs for a tabernacle. He gives them designs for for the Ark of the Covenant. He gives them the designs for the mercy seat that would sit upon the Ark of the Covenant. He gives them all of these instructions, and he says, I have given you the ability to make these things. I want to engage you in the process of building my temple. I want to engage you in the process of doing what I have commissioned you to do to bring glory to me. That's what he's saying. Because once again, the God that we serve is a relational God. What happens many times is that we kind of veer off in these giftings. Exodus chapter 36, verses 2 through 7, looking at what happens when the nation of Israel actually puts their hands to the craft. Moses called Bezalel and Oholiab, and every craftsman in whose mind the Lord had put skill, everyone whose heart stirred him up to come to do the work. So there was There was a choice. You either chose to do this for God or you chose not to do it for God. You either choose to use your abilities for God or you choose to use your abilities for yourself. You choose to use your abilities for God or you choose your abilities to use your abilities for the devil. There's a choice. There's always a choice how we use this. And he says he called the ones who were willing, who had the choice and who exercised that choice to use that ability for him. He calls them together and they received from Moses all the contribution that the people of Israel had brought from doing the work in the sanctuary. They still kept bringing him free will offerings every morning, so that all the craftsmen who were doing every sort of task on the sanctuary came, each from every task that he was doing, and said to Moses, "The people bring much more than is enough for doing the work that the Lord has commanded us to do." That is every pastor's dream. And then word was proclaimed, let no man do anything more for the contribution of the sanctuary, because we still don't have enough. That's the only reason why I won't say that. Now, if God tells me to tell you, hey, we got it all, we don't need any more, I will do that. All right. I just wanted to be clear there, So the people were restrained from bringing, for the material that they had was sufficient to do all the work and more. Wow. So God uses them, and in the middle of them using them, God is blessing them. And God is using them and blessing them, and God's purposes are being fulfilled. Look at what it says, Exodus chapter 39. As they're finishing up the work, Exodus 39 verse 43, and Moses saw all the work, and behold, they had done it as the Lord had commanded, so they had done it. And then Moses blessed them. I know I've jumped a few chapters there, but I wanted to make this point to you today. I want to make that God uses us because if we are willing to be used of him, he will get the glory and we will receive the blessing. But we have a choice. Because within all of that, there's still stuff that's going on. I just jumped 32, I jumped 33, I jumped 34. I mean, I went from 31 to 36 for a purpose. But somewhere in the middle of that, people were making other choices. And their choices that they were making at that point would affect them. And it was a choice based on their circumstance. The first point that I want to talk to you about is that we have a choice. The second thing is that we all have circumstances that we've got to work through. Every one of us has circumstances that you and I are dealing with. Things that will affect how we live this life out. Max Lucado writes in his book, Traveling Light. He gives the following story. When Lloyd Douglas, author of The Robe and other novels, attended college, he lived in a boarding house. A retired, wheelchair-bound music professor resided on the first floor. Each morning, Douglas would stick his head into the door of the teacher's apartment and ask him the same question. Well, what's the good news? The old man will pick up his tuning fork, tap it on the side of his wheelchair, and say, that's middle C. It was middle C yesterday. It will be middle C tomorrow. It will be middle C 1,000 years from now. The tenor sings flat. The piano across the hall is out of tune. But my friend, this is middle C. An even greater source of comfort than knowing the constancy of middle C is the constancy of knowing that Christ does not change. That God's expectations for us do not change. That despite the circumstances that we're in, God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. It doesn't matter your circumstance. It doesn't matter that you're singing off tune, that you're not doing as you thought you would do. You thought at 60 that you would have enough energy to do what you did in your 40s, and you're just realizing today it's not happening. But God does not change. Your circumstances are beyond you. We tend to so focus on our circumstances that we miss out on this promise that God has given to you and I, that He is the same, that He does not change. Read with me, chapter 32, starting in verse 1. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, 6 weeks he was up in the mountain. Just so you have a point of reference. The people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, "Up, make us idols who go before us. As for this Moses, this person, this man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." So Aaron said to them, "Take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand, and he fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." And when Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rise up and play. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, for your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way that I have commanded them. They have made for themselves a golden calf and have worshipped it, sacrificed to it, and said, 'These are the gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt.' And the Lord said to Moses, 'I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I might make a great nation out of you.' But Moses implored the Lord his God and said, 'O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against these people whom you have brought up out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent did he bring them out, to kill them in the mountain and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn your burning anger and relent from this disaster against your people. Remember the covenant that you made with Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore your own self and said, I will multiply your offspring as the stars of the heaven, and all the land that I have promised I will give to your offspring, and they shall inherit it forever.' And the Lord relented." 6 weeks they're without a leader. 6 weeks they're without a guide. They thought it was done. You brought us out of Egypt. This ain't the land flowing with milk and honey. It's still a wilderness. There's sand, a lot of sand all around us. There's a mountain in front of us, and there's wilderness to the side of us. You brought us here to die. Man, we remember a God that we could touch. We remember a God that we could see. We remember a God that was kind of, if we could just see him like we saw when we were in Egypt, when they had all these gods fashioned out. If we could just see God. You see, it was a good intention that with which they built an idol. It was with good intentions. They wanted to worship God, a God that they could see. But it was contrary to God's plan for them. And I fear that this is our American society today. Not that we sit and we fashion golden calves, but that we have fashioned in our society golden calves. Maybe not made of gold or metal, but that we've become an idolatrous nation. And we serve the mighty dollar. And we worship our politicians. And we worship other things. And we place a value over them, on them, that is greater than God. And we don't necessarily replace God. And here's the thing, is that that's really the crux of this. This is a pivotal moment. This is a pivotal moment. It's not that they're replacing God, because they say we want to worship the Lord, but then they say that here we're going to fashion gods. They want to worship the Lord. They sacrifice to the Lord, one L, one Lord, not lords, but they fashioned gods because they were conflicted. And very much like we're conflicted today, because idolatry isn't just about replacing God, it's about revising God. We want to make God in our image. We want to revise God to be a comfortable God. George Bernard Shaw once said this. He said, God made man in his image. Unfortunately, man has returned the favor. We keep fashioning God into our image. We see that when we talk about and have discourses concerning everything from science down to even psychology and the human perspective. We see that it's not necessarily that we're replacing God, but we want to change God. We want God to be kind of more like us. We want God to be really understandable. We want people to understand God a little bit more. So we want to change the character and the nature of God so that we can be more relevant for today. And I'm not saying that changing the way that we do things is bad, but changing the message is never good. Isaac Newton discovered the laws of God. When he actually discovered the laws of physics and he made the statement as a believer that he was actually once again reaffirming God's creative work in universe. And today we've seen that science has completely taken that God out of the entire equation and removed God out of any kind of equation that deals with our understanding of how the world works. And when we do that, listen, what happens is that eventually our morality and our ethics are affected as well. When we revise God, our morality and our ethics move to a place where there are no longer absolutes. But I want to tell you, our God has absolutes, and there are times when the love of God is willing to say no to us. I know Joanne kind of gave a message of prophecy in the middle of her worship today. It's okay when God tells you no. Actually, that's probably many times the best thing for us is when God immediately says no. For some of us, we kind of wait on that, and we debate God, and we say, "Well, God, how about? I think you're really saying maybe." And God was like, "No, I didn't say maybe. I said no." Paul addresses this same thing in the book of Corinthians, 1 Corinthians. He writes this in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 through 14. For I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud. Now he's referencing this particular pivotal moment in history. He says, all of our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them. And that rock was who? Christ. God had a plan. And Christ fulfilled that plan. And Christ, even in the beginning, even as all of this was unfolding, it was pointing to the great Redeemer of mankind. He goes on to say, nevertheless, with most of them God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things took place as examples for us, that we might not desire evil as they did. Do not be idolaters as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up and to play. We must not indulge in sexual immorality as some of them did. And 23,000 fell in a single day. Wow, we haven't got to that part yet. We must not put Christ to the test, as some of them did and were destroyed by serpents, nor grumble as some of them did and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now these things have happened to them as an example to us, but they were written down for our instruction, in whom the end of ages has come. Therefore let anyone who thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall. Because there's no temptation that has overtaken man. Wow. So God gives us this picture that there are absolutes in our lives, and there are times that God tells us no, and God is keeping us from things. Because what they were doing, they were not so much replacing God, because that's the only God that they knew, and they were putting that identity on that calf, the identity of the deliverer God. But in so doing, they were revising who God was. And I got to question many times. I've got to question, what are our intentions when we do what we do? Are we doing it to make God more palatable? Are we doing the things that we do in our walk with God to make it more easy for us to walk with God? Do we push God? Do we do what? You remember the old story, Jefferson's Bible, right? Where he redacts a quarter of the Bible. Do we redact the Bible, the Word of God, to make it easier for us to digest? Do we say only this is good and this is not? Do we get so consumed with one issue in the Bible? We all know people like that. Calvinism, oh my goodness, it's all about Calvin, all about Calvinism, and once saved, always saved, and tulip, and this and that. And people can walk around circles and have a theological discussion about one thing in the Bible, and you're like, dude, there are like a million other things in Scripture. Do you know anything about anything else? We get so caught up in one thing, and we revise God to make God easier for us to explain. I want to tell you, there are mysteries of God I can't explain, and I'm okay with that because He's God. And if I understood everything about God, why would I need God? He's God. He's the immeasurable. We don't have that. We don't have the full understanding of who He is. And that's okay for us as believers to walk in faith. There are great mysteries that we have in God. And in those mysteries we find comfort and solace to know that He is still at work, even when we mess things up. In chapter 23, the end of chapter 22, we see a great, chapter 32, we see a great falling away. We see God bring judgment to His people. But then He's about to do it again, because there's still people that are still being ignorant, that are still trying to do it their way. And look at this. there's a conversation that happens between Moses and God. And it's an interesting conversation because it's a conversation. It's Moses, God. Moses, God. Moses, God. And it's like this, there's this interaction. And we don't see that in today's society, so we don't quite understand the profound nature of this interaction. Because Moses actually stands up to God. And he says, God, if you do this, the nation of Egypt will say, you led them out so that you could just slaughter them and kill them. You led them to their own slaughter. And don't you think God already had an answer for that? Yeah, I believe God had an answer for that already. But he is once again using Moses to look at his heart and to bring his heart to the people. And it's in this understanding and this nature that God has placed inside of Moses, that Moses comes down from the mountain and he engages the people after having a conversation with the Lord. So Moses, chapter 33, starting in verse 12, Moses said to the Lord, see, you say to me, bring up this people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. Yet you have said, I know you by name, and you have also found favor in my sight. Therefore, if I have found favor in your sight, please show me now your ways, that I may know you in order to find favor in your sight. This is powerful. Moses actually lays himself. Listen what he does. He lays himself vulnerable. It's like, have you ever been to the doctor's office? And you walk into the doctor's office and they say, remove your shirt, pull your pants down. And you're like sitting there and you're like, whoa, what's happened here? I don't like this. I just had one of these appointments where they did a scan and they had me take off my pants, stay in my underwear. And I was like, I'm just not comfortable with that. It's an exposure. You're exposed, right? We don't like to expose ourselves. We don't like to lay ourselves bare. And this is what Moses is doing. He's going before the greatest medical doctor that has ever been. And he's standing there and he's realizing, I've put a lot of clothing between me and God. I've kept covering myself. And I wanted to be like the people. Because I understand the people. I understand where the people are coming from. And he says, you have said, I know you by name, and you have also found favor in my sight. Now, therefore, if I have found favor in your sight, please show me now your ways, that I may know you in order to find favor in your sight. Consider to this this nation as your people. And he said, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. And he said to him, if your presence will not go with me, do not bring us up from here. For how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not in your going with us that we are distinct? Listen to this. He says, is it not that you going with us that we are distinct? I and your people from every other people on the face of the earth. And the Lord said to Moses, this very thing that you have spoken I will do for you. For you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name. Moses says, please show me your glory. And he said, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim before you my name, the Lord, and I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious. I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. But, he said, you cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live. And the Lord said, behold, there is a place by me where you shall stand on the rock. And when my glory passes by, I will put you in the cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face you shall not see. My face you shall not see. You shall see me in my glory, but my face you shall not see. You will be in my presence, but my countenance, you can't experience that yet. There's coming a day when we shall know the face and the heart of God. And in all of this we see that the primary objective for putting away all idols, for not replacing God and revising God, is so that we can truly understand what it means to be in His presence. His presence has nothing to do with objectifying who He is. His presence is all about what He does in us. A golden calf can never change your life. An idol, money, power, fame, it can't change your life. It will never truly bring you the fulfillment that you need in this life. And this is what He's saying. He's saying we've tried so much to revise God that we've missed out on the very presence of the living God. And I want to tell you something. God is present here all the time. The question is, do we recognize Him? Do we hear His voice? Do we discern what He's saying to us? Do we live a life of balance, that we know how to balance truth and grace when He does speak to us? Do we recognize the people that He has placed all around us to help us, to guide us, to pray with us? Because He has given us a body of believers. And He says, to some I have given this talent, and to others I have given this gift. But we're all one body. Some of you are the hands, some of you are the fingers, some of you are the toes, some of you are the hips, some of you are just a great liver. And that is good and necessary and useful. But do you recognize your part in the body of Christ and in the presence of the living God? With every eye closed and every head bowed, I want to call you to be vulnerable today. We started out with just this beautiful picture of what it meant to be used by God. I don't think there's a mistake in there that God put chapter 31 and 36 and then wedged in there the golden calf. I think in reality what He was pointing to you and I is that we always live in that in-between. We live with the choices of using our gifts and our talents to bring glory and honor to God, to live a life that is blessed and is a blessing to others. And in that in-between, we have the choice. We can either put a golden calf, replace and revise God, or we can do what He has called us to do, be diligent in seeking Him and knowing Him and destroying that golden calf. Getting rid of it. Don't make excuses. You know, one of the worst things that happens in this interaction, Moses approaches Aaron and he looks at Aaron and he says, "What's this golden calf?" And Aaron responds to him. He says, "I don't know what happened. We collected a bunch of gold, threw it in the fire, and out came a golden calf." What? No. It didn't just happen. A golden calf in your life didn't just arise out of nowhere. You either put your treasure into the storehouse of God to build His temple, or you put your treasure where it ought not have been, and out came this golden calf because you invested, you put your time, you put your talent in the wrong place, and now idolatry has become your God. Money has become your God. Sex has become your God. All these other things in this world that this world has to offer have become your God. You have either replaced God, revised God, or you're serving God. There is no other choice. Don't make excuses. Aaron had that opportunity at that moment, and he repented. He turned away from it. He destroyed that calf. And God used him to continue to consecrate the temple. See, for some of us here today, you've been vacillating. You've been saying, Pastor, you don't know the things that I do in the secret place. You don't know the things that I struggle with. God can't ever use me. I want to tell you right now, that's a lie from the pit of hell. The devil has every desire to keep you where you're at. But today is the day that you break that golden calf. Today is the day that you rise up like Aaron. You're saying, you are willing to say, I am no longer going to make excuses about how this thing came about. I am going to destroy it, and I am going to move forward with God, what God has for me in my life. That choice is yours. Are you willing today to stop revising God, making Him comfortable for you, making excuses for yourself? Are you willing to say, God, here am I. Change me, transform me, renew me, direct me, fill me? Is that you this morning?